Jacksonville, Florida. March 30th, 2025. It was around 3:20 a.m. when a dispatcher with the Emergency Communications Center received a strange call. A resident of an apartment complex off Arlington Expressway reported seeing a man wandering outside. He was clearly disoriented, and his left lower leg and left arm were bleeding heavily. When officers arrived, they tried to figure out what had happened, but his answers were scattered and made little sense. In situations like this, patrol officers usually assume they're dealing with a late-night fight or a failed street robbery. But then, one detail on the pavement caught their attention. Blood. It wasn't just a few random drops where the injured man had been standing. It was a continuous trail, leading from the parking lot straight toward the apartment buildings. So what do the officers do? They pull out their flashlights and start following it. The trail goes up a staircase and ends right outside the door of one apartment. Inside, everything is completely quiet. The officers step into the apartment, not realizing that this very moment will connect a quiet Florida neighborhood to a story that began years earlier in an entirely different country. On the floor lies the body of a 30-year-old woman. As first responders treat the injured man outside, one question immediately becomes impossible to ignore. Who was this woman to him, and what made him walk away into the darkness, leaving her behind that closed door? To understand who the woman inside that apartment was, we need to go back 3 years and start in Cuba. Her name was Yanalis de la Caridad Casales. She was 30 years old and originally from Santiago de Cuba. Think about what it takes for someone to leave everything behind, travel across an entire continent, and start over with absolutely nothing. In 2022, Yanalis chose one of the toughest migration routes possible. She crossed into Nicaragua, then made her way through Honduras and Guatemala before traveling the full length of Mexico. This was anything but a vacation. It was an exhausting journey that demanded determination at every step. And she made it. Her final destination was Jacksonville. The choice made sense. Jacksonville has a large Cuban community, making it much easier for newcomers to build a new life and adjust to living in the United States. Yanalis didn't try to avoid immigration authorities. She followed the legal process and was granted official status under Form 1-220A. For anyone unfamiliar with immigration paperwork, here's what that means. Form I-220A allows an asylum applicant to legally live and work in the United States under the supervision of immigration authorities, while a federal immigration court reviews the case. Once she received her paperwork, Yanalis began building a new life. Based on what she shared online, her schedule was relentless. Long, demanding work shifts were followed by strict discipline in the gym. She regularly posted videos of her workouts, encouraging other women to push themselves and reach their goals. At the same time, she consistently sent part of every paycheck back to her parents in Cuba. I spend a lot of time analyzing criminal cases where the people involved keep such a low profile that investigators struggle to piece together their lives. But this case was the complete opposite. Yanalis had a clear plan. Her entire digital footprint showed someone steadily moving forward. Everything pointed to growth, stability, and a future she was building one step at a time. One of the biggest signs of that progress was buying a car. In the United States, owning a vehicle is a major step toward true independence. She proudly shared photos of her new car online just 1 week before her body was discovered. A steady job, financial independence. Every sign suggested she had finally moved beyond simply surviving. But behind all that progress was one major part of her life that had followed her from Cuba. While Yanalis was building a future and supporting her family, someone on the other side of the ocean kept her personal life from truly moving forward. That person was Carlos Jordanes Aldana. He was 38 years old. Their relationship had begun long before Yanalis immigrated to the United States. By the time she started her new life in America, they had already been together for more than 6 years. Their story could have followed the familiar path of eventually reuniting in the United States. Instead, everything changed because of one criminal case. While Yanalis was settling into her new life, Carlos traveled back to Cuba. That was where local authorities took him into custody. There's one important detail worth pointing out here. American public records contain no official documentation explaining the charges that led to Carlos's conviction in Cuba. There are no publicly available court rulings or charging documents that reveal exactly why he was arrested. What is confirmed, however, is that he served time in prison. Multiple family members verified that fact. Carlos ended up behind bars, and the distance between the couple became more than just geography. It became a legal barrier as well. At that point, their relationship entered a long and very practical phase. Supporting someone incarcerated in another country is expensive. Legal fees, regular international money transfers, and covering a prisoner's basic needs all required significant financial resources. Almost all of that burden fell on Yanalis. The dollars she earned through exhausting work shifts didn't just pay for her own daily expenses. A substantial portion also went toward Carlos's legal costs and the ongoing expenses associated with his incarceration. In private conversations with close friends, Yanalis was honest about how she felt. Trying to maintain a relationship with someone serving time in prison while living thousands of miles away had become emotionally exhausting. Constantly waiting for phone calls from the correctional facility, combined with the reality of being the woman waiting for a convicted partner, placed enormous psychological pressure on her. Even so, she had no intention of ending the relationship. If anything, she was preparing for his future arrival. Her goal was clear: get Carlos out of the prison system and bring him to a place where everything had already been built for him, so he wouldn't have to start over from scratch. When you study criminal cases, one thing stands out over and over again. Common sense is often replaced by what's known as the rescuer syndrome. Relationships like these almost always have one person who gives everything they have, while the other simply receives. In this case, the roles couldn't have been clearer. Yanalis was the one carrying the entire financial burden, covering the costs of Carlos's survival while he was incarcerated. The most ironic part is that every sacrifice she made was focused on bringing the day of their reunion closer. Step by step, she solved his legal problems without ever realizing who she was actually preparing to welcome into her home. Eventually, Carlos's release was secured, and obtaining permission to enter the United States became only a matter of time. That day finally arrived on March 16th, 2025. After 3 years and 1 month of non-stop waiting, Carlos's plane landed at Jacksonville International Airport. Yanalis was there to meet him, surrounded by relatives. She had bought 5 heart-shaped balloons. One of them carried a simple message: "Welcome back." All you have to do is look through the digital record from that day to understand how much this moment meant to her. She recorded his arrival on her phone and uploaded a short video almost immediately. The caption perfectly captured the end of her long, exhausting journey. 3 years and 1 month. We finally made it. Thank you, God. The woman in that video isn't someone defeated by hardship. She's someone who genuinely believes the hardest part of her life is finally behind her. Carlos walked through the front door of the apartment on Arlington Expressway. For the first time, they were living in a world that Yanalis had built herself. She showed him the life she had created, introduced him to her new circle of friends, and of course showed him the car she had proudly purchased just days earlier. It was tangible proof of everything she had accomplished on her own, while Carlos was serving his sentence back in Cuba. The most important stage of their life together had just begun. And this is where almost every criminal case becomes deceptive. When we look back at cases like this, we instinctively search for warning signs. Loud arguments spilling into the hallway, angry social media posts, strange purchases, anything that hints at what's coming. But real life rarely follows that script. For exactly 2 weeks, the apartment complex remained completely quiet. The Duval County incident logs were spotless. During those 14 days, not a single neighbor called emergency services to report shouting, arguments, or sounds of a physical confrontation coming from their apartment. Local police records contained no reports of domestic disturbances linked to that address. Carlos never drew the attention of patrol officers. He wasn't involved in public confrontations, and on the surface, he appeared to be someone adjusting well to his new life in the United States. That kind of picture can mislead even experienced investigators. From the outside, it looked as if Yannis's plan had worked exactly as she had hoped. She had helped him through serious legal trouble, brought him to a comfortable new life, and now they were simply enjoying the stability they had fought so hard to achieve. No visible conflicts, no obvious warning signs, just the quiet routine of two people finally reunited after years apart. But that silence wasn't a sign that everything was okay. It was a vacuum building inside those four walls. The illusion lasted exactly 14 days. Their new life came to an abrupt end during the early morning hours of March 30th. To understand exactly how everything unraveled, we have to rely on something completely impartial. The building's security cameras. Just after 3 a.m., the infrared motion sensor on one of the apartment doors suddenly wakes from standby mode. The small, smart doorbell automatically begins recording. The camera switches into black and white night vision, and Carlos Aldana slowly comes into view. The footage quietly documents his physical condition. He moves down the shared hallway with slow, unsteady steps. Large drops of blood fall from a severe wound on his leg onto the light-colored tile floor, creating the same trail investigators will soon follow, straight to the apartment door. He's breathing heavily. He stops in the empty stairwell. Then he quietly says a single sentence in Spanish. The microphone captures every word. Once translated, investigators see no room for misunderstanding. "I killed her." He says it in a flat, emotionless voice. No tears. No panic. No raised voice. The unexpected noise in the hallway immediately gets someone's attention. A nearby apartment door slowly opens, and a man steps into the doorway after being awakened by the unusual activity. The moment he hears the man standing outside calmly admit what happened, he freezes. For a split second, he can't even respond. Then instinct takes over. He shouts back, "You're crazy!" The neighbor immediately takes a step backward. The security footage clearly shows he has absolutely no intention of continuing the conversation with Aldana. He doesn't offer help for the severe injuries. He doesn't attempt to assist him. And he makes it equally clear that he wants nothing to do with what has just happened. Faced with that reaction, Carlos realizes he can't stay there any longer. He turns away from the camera and slowly walks down the concrete stairwell toward the parking lot. In modern criminal investigations, audio and video evidence like this can dismantle almost any defense strategy. When there are no living eyewitnesses, defense attorneys often argue that an unknown romantic partner was involved, that an aggressive intruder entered from outside, or that the incident happened during an act of self-defense. But in this case, none of those arguments can survive. A tiny camera mounted above someone else's front door permanently captured a direct and unmistakable admission. Investigators no longer had to spend weeks piecing together a case through circumstantial evidence or waiting for complex DNA analysis. The suspect had already identified his own role in what happened. At that point, officers were left with one routine task: locating and taking him into custody within the apartment complex. Once police confirmed the suspect had been detained, the crime scene investigators entered the apartment. The standard crime scene protocol immediately began. The first step in any investigation is a meticulous examination of the exterior for signs of forced entry. It's one of the most fundamental rules in forensic investigations. The team carefully inspected the door locks, window frames, ventilation openings, and balcony latches. Everything was intact. No shattered glass, no damaged door frames, no pry marks, no evidence that anyone had forced their way inside. That single technical finding immediately eliminated any theory involving an overnight burglar or an unknown intruder. The person responsible hadn't entered from outside. That person was already inside the apartment. He was there legally, shared the home with Yannis, and had unrestricted access to everything inside. Next, the medical examiner began the initial examination. Those first findings gave investigators the factual foundation that would later become extremely difficult to challenge in court. The official report documented a devastating fact. Yannis had sustained 13 sharp force injuries. Forensic investigators can learn a great deal from a case involving this many sharp force injuries. This was clearly not a single impulsive strike during a heated argument, nor does the evidence support a scenario of excessive self-defense. Case after case has shown that this level of repeated physical force points to an extreme and uncontrolled emotional outburst. The attacker continued the assault over and over, using far more force than would have been necessary to cause a fatal outcome. And that's where this case becomes so unsettling. Put two undeniable facts side by side. On one hand, the police record is completely clean. Not one complaint about shouting. Not one call requesting officers. Nothing during the entire 14 days they lived together. On the other hand, that same apartment became the scene of an extraordinarily violent confrontation. In most cases, an ending like this is preceded by a long, documented pattern of escalating abuse, controlling behavior, threats. The first physical assaults. The danger usually builds over time, leaving a trail that eventually reaches law enforcement. But that isn't what happened here. Every warning system stayed silent until the very end. The escalation went from 0 to its absolute peak in just a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, crime scene technicians continue documenting every detail inside the apartment. They measure the angles of the bloodstain patterns. They photograph every overturned object. Every piece of physical evidence is carefully collected. To an outside observer, the room looks like complete chaos. To forensic specialists, it's a precise three-dimensional map. Once those patterns are analyzed, they reveal exactly how the incident unfolded. The shape of the stains on the floor, the direction of the fine spatter on the walls, and the position of the displaced personal belongings allow investigators to reconstruct the physical sequence of events, almost second by second. At this stage, the investigation no longer depends on assumptions or possible motives. It follows the unchanging laws of physics. Every critical event took place within the confined space of the apartment. The attacker armed himself with a knife. The compact layout of a standard apartment left almost no opportunity for someone caught off guard during a sudden nighttime attack to retreat safely. Any chance to create distance disappeared almost immediately. Yannis became physically trapped between solid walls and heavy furniture, with virtually no path to reach the hallway or call for help. This is where investigators arrive at a clear, evidence-based explanation for the attacker's own injuries. When someone delivers a rapid series of knife strikes with maximum force and under extreme emotional stress, the handle inevitably becomes coated with biological fluids. Once that happens, the plastic or metal grip becomes dangerously slippery. At some point, during another forceful swing, the attacker's hand loses its grip. His hand slides forward onto the blade itself. That's how investigators explain the deep laceration to Carlos's hand, the same injury doctors later closed with stitches. The severe cut to his lower leg follows the same logic. When someone is cornered, they instinctively fight back however they can. They throw up their arms to block. They push away. They kick in a desperate attempt to create distance. In that kind of chaos, the path of the knife becomes unpredictable. One uncontrolled downward motion deflects off an obstacle, and the attacker ends up seriously cutting his own leg. The sharp pain and rapid blood loss force Carlos to stop almost immediately. He no longer continues the attack. He abandons any further confrontation and simply steps away. Giannis remains on the floor, and by that point, there is no longer any realistic opportunity for life-saving medical intervention. Carlos slowly walks toward the apartment door. Blood from the deep open wounds soaks through his pants and runs down onto his shoes, leaving drops across the light-colored flooring. He reaches the door, unlocks it, and steps into the shared hallway. At that moment, the entire sequence of events comes together. Every piece of the timeline forms one continuous chain, finally explaining the origin of the blood trail that led responding officers from the street directly to the apartment. 17 minutes after the smart doorbell captured his spoken admission in the hallway, Carlos was taken into custody by armed officers. The tactical team located him within the apartment complex. Before anything else, officers escorted the suspect to a local hospital, where doctors treated the same lacerations we discussed earlier while reconstructing the physical struggle. Once he received medical treatment, he was transported directly to the Duval County Jail. A judge ordered that he remain in custody without bond while the criminal case moved forward. This is where straightforward forensic evidence collides with the slow pace of the legal system. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office formally charged Carlos Aldana with second-degree murder. That legal distinction matters. Under Florida law, a second-degree murder charge means prosecutors believe the death was intentionally caused, but without proof of a premeditated plan. That decision immediately sparked outrage among Yanalis's family and friends. Her close friend, Melanie Omasan, joined dozens of members of Jacksonville's Cuban community in demonstrations outside the county courthouse. Their demand was specific. They wanted prosecutors to upgrade the charge to first-degree murder, a charge that could carry a sentence of life in prison or the death penalty if a conviction were secured. The protesters based their argument on the physical evidence. They publicly stated that 13 knife wounds could not reasonably be explained as nothing more than a brief emotional outburst. For them, the legal classification failed to reflect the severity of what had happened. While that legal battle unfolded, another difficult process was taking place. Yanalis's father, who remained in Santiago de Cuba, made only one public request through local media. He wanted his daughter's body returned home so she could be laid to rest in Cuba. International repatriation is extremely expensive. To cover those costs, supporters quickly launched a GoFundMe campaign. Within a short period of time, 293 individual donors contributed more than $15,000, fully covering the transportation expenses. But even that final journey was not without complications. During the funeral, an unexpected mistake added another painful chapter to an already heartbreaking story. The funeral home miscalculated the dimensions. When the casket arrived at the cemetery, it would not fit inside the prepared crypt. Videos later circulated online showing workers loading the casket back onto the truck and leaving the cemetery. Yannelis's family was left waiting for hours, while funeral staff worked to correct the problem. I'd like to end today's case review not with speculation, but with documented facts that illustrate the broader picture. During just the first 3 months of 2025, 9 Cuban women lost their lives in violent crimes outside of Cuba. Those numbers challenge a common assumption. Many people believe that crossing the border successfully and obtaining legal immigration status automatically guarantees safety. The documented cases tell a different story. Sometimes moving to the other side of a continent changes only the location, not the outcome. As of now, Carlos Aldana remains in custody in an isolation unit, awaiting the scheduling of his preliminary court proceedings.